Welcome. Comparing the preseason standings predictions to the final standings for the Western Conference. Let's talk about it. First, I gotta say, I'm wearing the Coyotes jersey. I was gonna wear the Dallas jersey, but I already wore the Dallas jersey in the bracket video. I like to wear the conference winners essentially in the regular season, but I'm not gonna get too many opportunities to wear this jersey, so I'm wearing Coyotes as much as I can until I can't anymore. Getting into it, red is preseason predictions, green is final standings. Central Division, I predicted Dallas would have the most points in the Western Conference. They did. That's exciting. I never get that right. So, yes. Didn't get it right in the East, though. Nonetheless, Dallas finished first. Second place, I predicted Colorado and then Winnipeg. It was a little opposite. It was Winnipeg and then Colorado. I didn't anticipate Colorado having the setbacks they did, and they weren't major setbacks, but there are questions with the Colorado team that we didn't really have coming into this season. Goaltending I thought would be slightly better. I didn't think Gorgiev was going to be amazing, and didn't he get hurt throughout the year as well? I got questions on their defense, their depth scoring. There's a lot of offense is provided by that top line in Colorado, which is absolutely elite, by the way. Nonetheless, they finished third instead of second. Fourth place is where it starts to get a little interesting. Nashville going on an absolute heater to finish the season off. It looked like Minnesota was going to take that fourth spot and still maybe make the playoffs, but Nashville just went on an absolute tear. And here we are, right? So Nashville takes that fourth spot. Minnesota, injuries. I did a whole video. There's a whole lot of issues that happened with this team. I think they'll be back in that conversation for a wild card spot next year. I'm not entirely sure. They will be a playoff team next year. I have a lot of questions, and I don't know if we're going to get a lot of the answers this summer for Minnesota. But they finished in sixth place. Nashville, fourth place. I thought Nashville was just going to miss the playoffs. And they made them this year, so good on Nashville. St. Louis in fifth place. I think none of us really knew what to do with St. Louis coming into this year. Are they rebuilding? Are they retooling? What is going on with this team? They've kind of stood pat, and they've been okay. Obviously, they missed the playoffs this year, but they held their own up until the end, which wasn't too bad. But moving forward, you got to make some type of change. Otherwise, you're going to be a fringe playoff team that probably misses the playoffs more often than not moving forward. So I would expect to see changes in St. Louis. I'd hope we see changes for the sake of St. Louis fans. It's an incredible fan base down there for hockey. It's such a great hockey market over there. And as much as, I don't really care for St. Louis because I'm a Bruins fan and you beat us in 2019. It's a wonderful hockey market, and the fans are fantastic, and they deserve a good winning team and at least some direction, something to kind of anticipate going forward. Is it going to be a few years before we make the playoffs, and then are we going to be, Stanley Cup contenders perennially? At least is that the plan, or are we going to start building up now to make the playoffs and be a playoff team and not necessarily a Stanley Cup contender going forward for the next few years? So we've wanted that in Minnesota as well. Haven't quite gotten an answer. It looks like they want to stay around being a playoff team, but not necessarily a Stanley Cup contender. And I'm a little nervous St. Louis is going to get the same thing. If you're going to build it up right. Take a couple of years, take a step back a couple of years, do it right so you're in the conversation for a Stanley Cup, not in the conversation for a wild card position. That's just my 2 cents. St. Louis, I think it needs a little more direction, as does Minnesota. I think Minnesota has direction. It's just not the direction most people want it. But that's a whole conversation for later. Minnesota's future is very bright. Arizona finished in 7th place. I had them finishing in 6th, partly because I wasn't quite sure what St. Louis was going to do, partly because I thought Arizona was going to take a step forward. And to be honest, they did. They finished the season with 77 points, which isn't great, but they were also above 500 a couple months ago. Which is incredible. I think this is a team that will continue to grow in Utah. I think they have a fantastic foundation to build upon. And I think we can keep seeing them kind of begin to creep up the standings a bit. Right? I don't know if next year they'll be playoff contenders per se, but anticipating them to be around like 85 points, it could happen. Depends what they do in the offseason. Depends who they draft. Depends who makes the team out of training camp. There are questions, but questions we'll probably have answers to. Chicago, bottom of the barrel, no surprise there. Some people were picking Chicago to maybe move up a little more, like in the 7th or 6th spot because of Bedard, but this is a team sport, and one player, no matter how good they are, is usually not the difference maker in the standings, right? It's a team sport. Bedard, 18-year-old rookie, played 67 games, 61 points. That's not necessarily going to move the needle on a team that got 52 points. So Arizona 77 points, Chicago 52 points. I think it's safe to say going into next season, regardless of who Chicago gets in the draft, even if they get someone like Macklin Celebrini, projected number 1 overall pick, who should be fantastic straight out of the draft and insert into any lineup. I think you're still looking at a last place team right here. There's a lot of mediocre to good teams, to great teams in the Central Division, and I don't even think Chicago will get to that mediocre point. It's tough to make the Central Division, tough to make the playoffs in the Central Division if you don't have a pretty solid team around you. Nashville does. Minnesota did last year. Right? St. Louis, good. We'll see. Moving on to the Pacific, I predicted Edmonton to win the division. Everyone was a little nervous because Edmonton got off to such a rough start to begin the season. They finished the season in 2nd place, which is fantastic. It's an incredible rebound. Nonetheless, Edmonton is they have a strong team over there. They have some consistency in net with Stuart Skinner. I don't think he's the best goalie to ever exist, but he's held his own. He's very consistent night in, night out. You know what you're going to get. You know how to play around him to help him succeed and help prevent goals from going in your own net. So I think that's worked out very well for Edmonton. And that consistency in that, I think, is huge for them, right? Knowing what you're going to get out of your goaltender. They haven't had that in quite some time. Even when they had consistent goaltenders, you never knew if the goalie was going to post a shutout or give up 6 goals that night. So it's nice to know, we could use 4 goals to win this game. If we can get 4 goals every night, we should win almost every one of these games type thing. Next up, I had Las Vegas in 2nd place. Las Vegas dealing with some pretty substantial injuries throughout the year, falling into the 4th place, the last wild card spot. They will have the luxury of playing Dallas in the first round of the playoffs this year. Should be an interesting matchup. I'm sure Mark Stone will be back for Game 1, fully healthy, and probably score a goal. We could just call them the Vegas LTIRs. I think that name has been transferred from Tampa to Vegas now. All joking aside, though, Vegas, little bit of a down year in the points category, but nonetheless, they're still a powerhouse of a team. I was high on Seattle. I had them finishing in 3rd. I know a lot of people had them dropping out of the playoffs, which they did. I like Seattle, though. I like their defense. I really do like their defense. I think they have good depth offensive scoring. I wasn't expecting Matty Beniers to take such a big step back maybe not a big step back, but a step back. I was expecting him to kind of grow a little more, not necessarily go through that sophomore slump that we see from a lot of rookies in their 2nd year, and that's okay too. But Seattle, definitely an issue with top 6 scoring. That's kind of held them back a bit. They finished 6th in the season this year, but I was pretty high on them. My big question going into the season was their goaltending, and Joey Decord has come up this year, and he has looked excellent. I think he is the starting goaltender moving forward, and he is fantastic. Big Joey Decord fan. So I also had LA finishing in 4th. LA finishes in 3rd. Barely ahead of Las Vegas. It's a point difference of 1. Yeah. So, you can switch these 2 if you want. I mean, it was so close. It's like a virtual tie. Nonetheless, Los Angeles gets 1 more point than Vegas through this year and ends up in 3rd place. Through 3 of the 4 teams I predicted made the playoffs, except for Seattle, who finished 6th. Calgary, I had finishing 5. I thought they'd be somewhat closer to the wild card discussion than they were. But nonetheless, they still finished in 5th. They weren't absolutely abysmal to watch, but it wasn't great. It's tough because the organization should lean towards some type of full rebuild. But being a market in Canada, being kind of a diehard fan base, there's not usually a whole lot of appetite for those markets to go through rebuilds. And that's why we don't really see some of these teams go through rebuilds, like the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think that's as close as we got. The Montreal Canadiens and Ottawa Senators, kind of the exception to the rule. I know there was a lot of resistance in Montreal of going into a full rebuild. But we haven't seen that in Vancouver when it probably should have happened, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. We haven't really. Well, Edmonton was just bad. I don't know if they were intentionally doing that. I wasn't paying that much attention to Edmonton back then when they got a few first overall picks. But Calgary's always been pretty consistently good, right? Winnipeg, I mean, they just got their team back. They're still pretty new, so they haven't really had to go into a rebuild or anything just yet. But we thought they were going to begin a rebuild this past offseason with questions around Scheifele and Connor Hellebuck and all these guys potentially wanting out of Winnipeg. And that hasn't happened. They're a pretty solid team, so it's worked out for Winnipeg. But Calgary, we'll see what happens. They might just be one of those teams that kind of hangs around mediocrity because there's no appetite for a rebuild, maybe some type of retool. And if that happens, we could probably expect them to finish around 5th place next year. But if they do a commit to some type of rebuild, it doesn't have to be like tear it all down type of rebuild. You can swap pieces in and out and start rebuilding while remaining somewhat competitive but not playoff competitive. That may be more something along the lines we see. But nonetheless, we're moving on. I had Vancouver coming in 6th. Big questions regarding the coaching effectiveness, and the roster. So I had questions about their defense, and Rick Tocchet came in last year, the coach of the Canucks, and he really made it a point that this team needed to play team defense and provide support, not just for the defensemen, but for the goaltenders as well. Remember, Demko is out for a portion of the season as well. They finished in 1st place. But just like Bruce Boudreau and his predecessor, was it Travis Green was before Boudreau, you get the coaching bump, and it's great. It works. Bruce Boudreau finished that season off strong when he took over. The following season, it was pretty abysmal. And we saw something similar with Travis Green. I was expecting that trend to continue with Rick Tocchet. It hasn't. He's really emphasized team defense, and it's worked out fantastically. And they can transition their team defense to offense. And they have plenty of firepower. It's just a question of if you can keep the puck out of your own net. And Demko's been fantastic. But what I think has helped Demko is the team has been really getting into the slot and kind of making sure shots are taken outside of the slot by the walls and the blue line, right? Not high danger opportunities against Demko, which I think has helped his stats. I mean, he's already a fantastic goalie. We've known this. But it also really has amped up their defensive stats as a whole. And this is what I talk about with Ottawa and Buffalo. If they can figure out how to play team defense, and it's really not super hard, it's just getting buy-in from your players mostly. Vancouver, I had them going in 6th. They won the division type thing. So it's important. We see all the top teams in the league play team defense. We don't see a Stanley Cup winners that don't play team defense. Just is what it is. It's an important part of the game. So good on Vancouver for figuring that out and winning the division, essentially. Anaheim, 7th place. San Jose, 8th place. I don't think there was much surprise there. I thought Anaheim would take a little bit more of a step forward than they did. I still had them in 7th place. And it wasn't really, I guess Vancouver. I was closer than what actually happened, but I think I had Vancouver posted for around like 77 points. I was way off there, but I think I had Anaheim around like 71 points. and they finished with 59. So definitely not a good season. San Jose was awful, but we expected this. We expected this. Beginning at the beginning of the season, they traded Hurdle. They traded Meyer last year. They traded Eric Carlson, I believe, over the summer. And Hurdle at the trade deadline this year. So I think they're doing the rebuild right, but it's going to be a long-term process. And I feel for the fans in San Jose, right? It's a solid fan base. They really are. Sharks games, when the team is good, that arena is absolutely electric, and it's one of the most difficult arenas to play in. Just watching Bruins games growing up against San Jose when they were one of the best teams in the league every year. You could barely hear the commentators, Jack Edwards and Andy Brickley, over the sound of the crowd in San Jose. It's just I kind of feel for their fans over there. But on the bright side, there's a lot of strong pieces coming up in this organization. In the future and now, they'll continue to draft high and draft well. They do draft well. So the future will be bright for San Jose. It just might be several years away, maybe like 5-6 years. It's going to be a long time. But, that's what happens when you're already tied up in really, really hefty cap hits and contracts, really rough contracts. But I think they've done a good job getting rid of them. I've been impressed with Mike Grier so far. I know a lot of people won't agree with me. That's okay. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. But I think Mike Grier's done a good job getting rid of some of those contracts and really starting from scratch and starting to build from the bottom up. And I think that's something this organization has desperately needed. By the time you're ready to start competing for a playoff spot, Tomas Hertl might be like 35, 36 type thing, and maybe like at the tail end of his career. And are you going to pay him to be on a rebuilding team for several more years? I mean, you're already paying him, but like, does he become disgruntled? Does it become a bad locker room experience, bad leadership? I'm not saying Hertl would do that. He's like one of the happiest guys in the NHL. Dude always has a smile on his face. He's just having fun, but right, it's just help the player out, help the team out, and move forward. Even if that means parting ways with a fantastic person and player. So big misses. Vancouver, I missed heavily on that. I know a lot of other people did too, but even so, like 6th to 1st, that's a massive jump. I'd say Vancouver, New Jersey, and Buffalo were my 3 biggest flubs. Minnesota, fringe playoff team to missing the playoffs. They didn't miss it by too much, but once they were eliminated, they were eliminated, and they still had a few games left type thing. St. Louis was better than I expected. Seattle, kind of a flub. I don't think Seattle was as bad as their stats show. They did have an issue scoring goals, but their defense and goaltending was fine. So if they can go out, figure out some pieces for their top 6, I don't think they need to do much. I think they have some solid pieces that can bounce back. If you get a solid, if you get another top 6 winger to play alongside Matty Beniers, I think that line is fantastic. It was pretty good this year, but it wasn't great. Right? There's room for opportunity there. Is Bjorkstrand should he be playing that high up in the lineup type thing? For example. So I think Seattle can get better. Shane Wright should start factoring into their lineup next year as well. He should be a full-time NHL player next year. So I wouldn't expect them to stay in 6th next year as well. I'd expect them to be in 5th, maybe make a case for 4th, but I don't know who you knock out unless Vancouver drops way back down again. Las Vegas will be good next year. LA will probably be good next year. All their top players are pretty locked in. Edmonton will be good next year. As long as they have Draisaitl and McDavid, they'll be all right. Ekholm on the blue line, solid blue line piece. So I don't know if Seattle will be a playoff team next year, given the difficulty in this division of the top 4 teams. But they're going to make a case for it, and we'll see. So there you go. My preseason standings predictions compared to the final standings. Let me know. Let me know how right were you, who you had. Did you predict Nashville to make the playoffs over a team like Minnesota? Where did you have Winnipeg? I saw a lot of people over the preseason doing their own preseason rankings and stuff. A lot of people had Winnipeg missing the playoffs, and I get it. But if you look at their team on paper and you look at how that organization is structured and their team strategies, it's defensive first, right? And they have Connor Hellebuck in net, so they can keep a lot of pucks out of their net. And they have offensive weapons, so I think they made some necessary changes and did a pretty solid job. They did have a down patch throughout the year. They started the year strong. They finished the year strong. And it's playoff time, so I'm sure we'll see the whiteout in Winnipeg, which will be fantastic. That's always fun. So we'll see. I do want to give a shout out to Winnipeg Jets fans. I I did go to a Winnipeg Jets game in Winnipeg. What was it, 2022? So almost 2 years ago. It was like late 2022. That was a lot of fun. It's a very, very passionate fan base, but it's a very awesome fan base as well. Right? It's a lot of the larger markets. There's a lot more noise for negative. A lot of negative fans make a lot more noise because there's more negative fans because there's more fans usually in larger markets. But Winnipeg, I came up as a Bruins fan. I watched the Jets play the Leafs in Winnipeg. Right, I didn't really care who won. I wore a Winnipeg jersey, but I had my Bruins shirt underneath. And I'd show them my Bruins jersey, and people were just appreciative that I was there watching hockey. It was a really cool, welcoming fan base. And I feel for them because they didn't have a team for so long. That there are fans of almost every other team in Winnipeg as well. When I forget the stadium name, I don't know. But the Leafs Jets game I went to, there were a lot of Leafs fans there. And every time you watch a Jets game at home, you'll see the other team's jerseys in pretty decent quantity. And I think that makes it more difficult for a fan to keep going to those games if you know you're going to get out cheered by the opponent. But it also makes it fun in a sense. Those fans are incredible. They're diehard. I might do a video, or I might do like a ranking of best and worst fan bases. And it's all opinion and it's objective at the end of the day. It's just for fun, but I don't know. I've been on the fence about that for like a year now. So we'll see. That's it though. Again, just as my last few videos, I'm rambling at the end, so I appreciate you watching. Let me know what your comments, questions are, what you have, who you have moving up and down, who surprised you, who's really disappointed you. I think I did a video on that. I did videos on those as well. But hockey standings are fun. They're fun to look at. Points percentage, win, loss, overtime. I might do a video at some point soon with what I specifically look for in the overall rankings and records of teams. So that's all I got for now. I appreciate you. Take care.